Hi, I'm Chuck DeVetter. I want to talk today about how to wholeheart yourself, how to make God your protector instead of using things like anxiety and fear and anger and sadness and depression and confusion to protect yourself. That's what that is that our heart breaks, and when our heart breaks, we actually take those parts of our heart. God created fear of the Lord, and He created righteous anger. And when our heart breaks, what happens is then we begin to protect through dysfunctional fear and through dysfunctional anger among the other places of protection. And that's the self-protection thing. That what it does is it focuses on me, I. And really the gospel is about God's will be done, thy will be done, not me and my will. And so what happens is that as I go in and as I get into a place of self-protection, it just builds and builds and builds, and all of a sudden it drags me around for 2 or 3 days or whatever it happens to be. And that's not God's plan. God's plan is that I can walk in the Spirit, not the flesh. What I'm describing here is the flesh, and the flesh takes charge and it leads me around, and it makes things not only miserable, but it doesn't allow me to walk in intimacy and connection with Him. And so what happens is as I go through the one whole heart process, there's that time and place when the roots are gone. And when the roots are gone, I'm in a place where all of a sudden what happens is that I can deal with the patterns. Now the patterns are that place where I'm actually used to doing this same pattern over and over and over again. And even though there's not a root, there's a pattern that I need to deal with. And so what happens is I have to make a conscious choice that God's my protector and that I'm not going to protect myself. And in the midst of that, the best time to do that is in my thoughts, because when I can take captive my thoughts to the obedience of Christ. Now what that means is not casting out my thoughts, but what it means is that God is the one that takes my thoughts captive, and when I bring them to Him, He's empowered in order to bring healing to my heart and cut off those patterns. And so there's four distinct, there's four, and there's more than four. There's several different places where I can look for thoughts, and when I find those thoughts, what ends up happening is when they show up, what happens is I wholeheart those thoughts, and when I wholeheart those thoughts, that's what helps me to cut those things off so I can get right back in the Spirit, because it's all about walking in the Spirit more, in the flesh less, in the Spirit more, in the flesh less. What ends up happening is that the more time that I can spend in the Spirit, connected to God, the less double-minded I am, and what happens is I can build an identity in the Spirit. The longer I'm in the Spirit, my identity gets deeper and deeper in the things of God, and I become, and my identity is wrapped up in who I am in God. But if I spend more time in the flesh, then my identity gets wrapped up in who I am in the flesh and the lies that I've been believing about the flesh, and that doesn't work. And what ends up happening is I start thinking I'm who the enemy says I am instead of who I really am. And so what happens is as I'm walking through in my daily life or daily routine, there's certain thoughts that come up. One is blame. All of a sudden someone does something to me. Let's say they hit me in the nose or whatever. What happens is my automatic thought is to blame them, like they shouldn't have done that. Geez, they've done that 20 times and they should never do that. And so all of a sudden I focus on blaming them and trying to fix them, or something like that. And all of a sudden I become self-focused. That's flesh. That's not Spirit. So that if I can catch it in my thought stage before all the emotions show up and all that type of thing, what happens is then I can wholeheart that. I can go through that whole heart process right there. Another area would be if I'm judging them, trying to fix them or judge them or something like that, geez, they're this or they're that or whatever. That's still self-focused, self-protection thoughts. And so in another area would be rejection, where all of a sudden I'm thinking, boy, I should have said this or I could have said this, and I'm looking back trying to fix what I did in the past because maybe someone was going to react to it wrong or something like that. Let's say I'm preaching, and all of a sudden in the midst of preaching, what ends up happening is I'm thinking, well, geez, I bet you they thought that I should have said this or I should have said that. Well, if I study Jesus, what happens is He never said I should have or I would have, because He walked in the Spirit. He walked step by step with God. I'm in the Spirit. I don't have to look back. back, what happens is I get led by the Spirit, and what God releases is right. It doesn't matter if it makes sense or not. And so those places where I'm trying to go back and correct myself, or those places that I'm trying to go back and fix those things because of the fact that I'm concerned what people think, well, that's rejection. And so if I go back to whether it's rejection or if it's blame or it's where I'm judging someone or I'm trying to fix them or whatever it happens to be, those areas of my mind, if that's showing up, even if there's no feelings or emotions with it, if I can go back in the midst of those feelings, okay, or in the midst of those thoughts, okay, if I can catch them at the thought phase, if I can go back in the midst of those thoughts and I can wholeheart them right then and catch it right then before it starts building and more protection systems come in and all of a sudden I'm emotionally covered with negative emotions or protectors, then that's the time to catch it, because I can stand next to the person that just did that to me. In the midst of it, what ends up happening is I end up in a situation where I just go through, I wholehearted, and within 5 or 10 minutes what happens is I've made a conscious choice and he becomes my protector. So what that means is that if all of a sudden I'm blaming something, then I know anger's there and I know confusion's there, and so then I go back in that whole heart process and I say, Father God, I choose to forgive that person for either all the times they did it or that specific time, and then in the midst of that, I ask forgiveness for my unforgiveness, and then from there what happens is I bring them through that whole heart process where what I do is I go ahead and ask if Father God can come to me and all the times this happened, and then I go and I ask if Father God can come to that place of the blame and anger and confusion, and it's almost like I'm asking myself, because I'm asking those places of blame and anger, and in the midst of that what happens in all the places of protection there, His presence comes into those places. When His presence comes into those places, His love comes in, and then I ask if it's okay if Father God could bring those places all the way into Him, and what ends up happening in all that is that His love saturates those places. Now the reason I have to go to those places of protection is because if I just go to me at that place, what happens is that when my heart's broken, it's almost like the broken part has a choice, okay? But when that broken part chooses to allow Him to bring His love in, that's when His love comes in, and that's when I can cut off the emotions, and I don't and I'm able to love that person unconditionally and be in a place where I can be about His will being done instead of my will being done. And as that's going on, what happens is I just bring myself in all those situations. I ask, Lord, would you just come to me in all those places and just release your kingdom? And so that's what happens. And so what I'm really talking today about is catching things in your thought, taking the thoughts captive. The moment that those thoughts come in, whether it's blame or judgment or trying to fix someone, or maybe various types of rejection and things like that, if I can catch them right then they don't build. Then they don't add other protectors like sadness and depression, and it ends up dragging me around for 3 or 5 hours or 2 days or whatever it happens to be. So thank you very much.